Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artist makers and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. I'd love to invite you to stop by dailycreativehabit.com. I have created all sorts of resources for you because I truly believe that when you create, we all win. So I want to see as many of you stepping into your creativity fully, closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And I want to help you do that. So I've created resources like the Daily Creative Habit Journal. I've written a book, Make Fun a Habit. I have all sorts of free resources like this podcast and a Facebook group called Daily Creative Habit. Also, the paid membership for Daily Creative Habit, where we get together with like-minded creators, all pushing in the same direction, encouraging each other, and saying we're going to show up every single day to create something to get our work out there into the world. So if you would like to be a part of any of those things, again, stop by dailycreativehabit.com or simply visit my website, which is mikebrennan.me. Hey friends, for this episode, I am sharing part one of a two-part series that is actually a message that I shared at Digital Summit's event. And while this event was aimed at digital marketers and some of the context and examples that I spoke about in my talk were aimed at that industry, I think you can apply this no matter what you may be doing. So there's a lot of things that you can contextualize for your own creative projects, your own creative job, or even your interests that you're pursuing. So I encourage you to listen in and take some notes and enjoy part one of Strategic Sparks. So my name is Mike Brennan, and I say that I am a creator and communicator telling stories on pages and stages. And I'll get into a little bit of what that means. But before I go too far into that, I want to just know who here considers themselves creative. Raise your hand. That's a fair amount, which I might expect in a session that's talking about creativity. You would probably be drawn here for some reason. But there are a lot of people who don't actually consider themselves creative. Matter of fact, I get into conversations every single day where somebody says, I'm not creative. I can't even draw a. Come on, people, help me out here. A stick figure, thank you, yes. Right, that's what everybody always says. I'm not creative, I can't even draw a stick figure. And I'm like, it's not about drawing a stick figure. And really what happens is so many people actually confuse being creative with being artistic. And I'm like, creativity is so much bigger than that. Creativity involves so many facets of our life, and there are things that we do every single day that are creative that we actually don't really credit to creativity because we don't view it through that lens. I want to ask you the question, what is your biggest challenge in creating? So as we start here today, I want you to think, and I really want to know the answer. Like, what is the thing that blocks you from creating? Let me hear it. What's that? Life? Yes, sometimes life gets, what's that? Burnout, yes. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, so put a pin in that one. What? ADHD. Judgment. Time, right? Yeah. Oversaturation. Ooh, I like that one. Sometimes, right? Inspiration. I'm not feeling inspired. I don't know what to create right now. I know I'm supposed to create something, but I don't know. The muse hasn't come, right? Or maybe it is just trying to juggle various priorities. And creating always seems to be the thing that's lower on the totem pole because it's not quite as important or as pressing as some of the other things that we have going on. So it's really easy for us to let these things get in our way, to stop us from actually creating, and yet we still have to create, right? Maybe you're here today and your creation looks like social media content. Maybe it looks like blog content. Maybe it looks like some other form of creation content. Or maybe it's completely different than that. Maybe you create systems. Maybe you create pathways. Maybe you create a mess. I don't know, whatever it is that you create, it still falls into the same category. It's creativity. And so I just want to start at that place where it's like, it's bigger than drawing a stick figure. It's bigger than a musical instrument. It's bigger than whatever you may have assigned creativity to in terms of it being artistic. And I also want to just warn you that my background is actually artistic, visual art. And I'm going to share some of that stuff, but I don't want you to lose the context here. For me, I'm telling you for a reason, but I want you to see past the context to your own context. I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about and not just automatically go, that's not me. I'm not artistic. I can't draw. I can't do whatever that looks like. Therefore, this isn't for me. Because we're going to talk about something that is so much deeper than that. Do you ever feel yourself in the gap? Like on the one side, you've got, here's where I am currently, today, right now, in the midst, as I'm staring at this project or this task. And on the other side is where I want to be, or maybe who I want to be. And there's this big gap in the middle. There's this tension of, here's where I am, but here's where I want to be. Here's what I'm doing, but here's what I want to be doing. And I'm not really sure how to bridge that gap. That's part of my story, and it's also part of what I do in helping people. I help people bridge that gap so that there's actually actionable steps and inspiring steps to take you from where you are currently to where you want to be in terms of a creator. And there's stuff here that we're going to talk about that's process, but there's also things that we're going to talk about that are more tied to who you are as a person. Because you're much bigger than whatever your particular role at your company or your job description says. We all know that. But this stuff is bigger than just that application point. Did you know that, according to Adobe study in 2012, 75% of people think that they are not living up to their creative potential? Think about that. 75%. That's a large number. That's a large number of people who are standing on this side going, I know there's more on the other side. I just don't know how to get there. I don't know how to tap into that. I don't know how to actually create something that seems to be more than just surface level or maybe whatever the industry standard is. I don't know how to tap into that thing that's actually more connected with me, my purpose, my gifting, my passion, and being able to channel it and funnel it in a way that it comes out and makes a difference, not only to me, but the people around me. It's a different kind of work. I want to share with you today a couple of things. The first thing I want to share with you is my story. And the reason I'm sharing my story is to give you context. Because I want you to understand why I'm so passionate about this. And this isn't just like another thing on a list for me of like, oh, I could talk about creativity, I could talk about productivity, I could talk about all these different things. This is something that I'm very passionate about because it's very personal and professional. And so as I share my story, I'm going to share some things that are very personal. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to give you context. And I also believe that in a room this size, some of you may have similar experiences. Maybe it looks a little different in a different context. But I want to give you maybe some hope today, some inspiration today, if I can. When I was a kid, I was the typical artist kid who was creating greeting cards for family members of various cartoon characters that were my world, and I would give it to family members, and their face would light up, and they'd be like, "You created this for me?" I was like, "Yes." And I realized, not necessarily as a 6-year-old, but looking back as I got a little older, there's something that happened here. There's an exchange that happened here that I really need to do more of. Because I realized that I could create something, I could give it to somebody else, and their world can be impacted, even if it's just a smile. And I was like, that's what I want to do with my life. That's what I want to do with my time, with my energy. I want to leverage everything towards that because that's me showing up the best version of me and being able to do something that brings value to somebody else. So fast forward a little bit, I had one of those dreaded conversations that every parent has when their child comes to them and says, I want to go to art school. And of course, they weren't exactly thrilled. They're like, don't you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, something that makes money, right? Because in their mind, it's the starving artist. And they're like, we don't want you to be the starving artist. And I totally understood their concerns, but I was really stubborn. And I said, okay, well, it's art school or nothing. I'll show you, I'll shipwreck my life, right? So they agreed and they said, okay, well, let's do this, but let's at least do something that's commercially viable, like graphic design. So I went to art school in New York City, 2 art schools, actually 2 of the top ones, and went for advertising and graphic design. And so my trajectory is set. I'm leveraging my creativity for my career. This is great. I graduate, and I'm working in all sorts of different places. You know what happens. You work for a little bit. You kind of hit a ceiling. You move around somewhere else. Hopefully, you kind of keep playing that game, and you gain different skill sets and all that, right? And so I'm working for various ad agencies and design agencies, and there are clients like Heineken and Mobil and Chase and, wait for it, Buns of Steel. Yes, I learned a lot from them. And if you're younger and you don't know what Buns of Steel is, please don't Google that right now. So I'm working, and this is great, right? Everything is the way it's supposed to be. I'm doing what I was made to do, using my creativity, making a living from it, working with great clients, yes. And eventually, with enough job changes and role changes, I found myself in a place where I was at this magazine company that we had a few different magazines that were published, and basically it was a deadline every 2 weeks, and we were cranking out work. It was a small staff, great environment. But the pace was killing me. And sooner or later, I found myself sitting there going like, I don't understand why I'm kind of feeling out of sorts. I'm doing what I say that I love to do, and yet I feel like I can't even enjoy it, and I'm on to the next thing. And I'm starting to experience burnout. So much so that it became this weight of like, I don't really know what to do with this. And this is back in a time when people didn't really talk too much about it. And so suffering silently was like the badge of honor. And so I suffered silently until I couldn't suffer anymore. And I just said, I'm out. And I not only left that company, I actually left the whole industry. I said, this isn't working anymore. There's something that's actually happening to me as a person. This is gnawing away, and this isn't healthy. And I got to just get away from this. And so I left it, and I put my creativity on a shelf for about 10 years. During those 10 years, I did something completely different. And to be honest, I ended up in a couple of positions where it wasn't really aligned with my skill set or my passion. And then comes depression. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute. What is happening here? Earlier, I'm experiencing burnout, and now I'm in the midst of depression because I'm not creating anything. And that picture of that kid who was creating something for the joy of it and giving it to his parents in that exchange, I seem to be so far from that. And I didn't even realize, to be honest, that I was suffering from depression. It took some people around me to say, hey, you're not yourself. Because for me, depression was, well, I'm not like sitting on the couch. I can't not get out of bed. Like that's what depression looked like for me at that point, right? It was a very limited view. But really, I wasn't functioning well. And my world started to collapse again. And I'm in the midst of this place going like, what is the deal? Like this was not in the brochure. This isn't supposed to happen. And I realized that I had to leave where I was. I had to move. We had to sell a house. There was a lot of upheaval in the midst of this, trying to deal with depression. And the final straw, rock bottom, was my dad ended up with cancer and passed really quickly. And suddenly I'm sitting there in this heap of ash going, how did I get here? I don't understand how this happened. And more importantly, how do I get out? What do I do? It was during that season that I started to entertain this idea again of what would it look like for me to actually come back to my creativity? And not necessarily at this point in my life for clients and committees and things that are external facing, but really, what does it look like for me to come back to creativity for me? Because at one time it brought me joy, because at one time I was that kid who just fell in love with the creation process and then being able to give it away and affect people's lives and feel good about it. Was that even possible? And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know. No idea. But it was right at that place where someone introduced me to this idea of a 365-day art-making journey. It's exactly what it sounds like. Show up for every single day of a year and create something. Problem. I'm suffering from depression. I don't really have a lot of energy and can't really put a lot of effort into it. And I don't really know what this is going to look like, and I don't really know why I'm doing this other than trying to recapture something that I lost. But I thought, what do I have to lose at this point? I'm already at rock bottom. And so I embraced this idea. And I showed up for the very first day, day one. I blew the dust off of the sketchbook, took a pen, sat in my local Starbucks, and drew this awful Starbucks coffee cup. And then I looked at the page, and I was embarrassed because I thought, man, if someone was looking over my shoulder and they knew that I went to art school and that's what I came up with, they'd be like, what happened, dude? That's terrible. And so I was ashamed and embarrassed, but at the same time, I knew this is something more than just this drawing that's going on right now. And so what I decided to do is I decided to write at the top of the page, day one. I knew that this was a journey. This wasn't simply just a one-off project or product, if you will. And of course, I had to gain back some capacity because I had taken 10 years where I did absolutely nothing. I couldn't expect myself to just jump right back in where I had left off. So I kept going, day after day, experimenting, trying different things, giving myself a place to play, to break things, to figure out what does this look like. And again, I realize this is a personal journey. This is a personal journey of me trying to rediscover something, but it affected me professionally as well. And I'm going somewhere with this. So I kept leaning in and I'm like, let me try different mediums. Let me try different themes. Let me try different styles. Let me just try anything and everything. And all I could do was manage to show up for 15, maybe 20 minutes a day because I'm suffering from depression. And I'm like, at this point, I don't know. I can't do anything more than that. Until I did. This is an image that's 12 years of showing up every single day and doing a drawing or painting. And counting, by the way. I'm still going. It started off with that crappy Starbucks coffee cup. But I kept experimenting. I kept playing. I kept diving in to see what could this look like. I kept following some curiosity. And here's the thing that I realized about creativity. It's bigger than this. It's bigger than artwork. It's a mindset. And honestly, it's something that you can leverage no matter what it is that you're looking to create. And in the midst of this, what happened was I started to realize that there were things at work that weren't just for me on my personal journey, but I actually started to realize that there's a process at work here. And when I started to examine it and document it, I realized that this process could actually be applied no matter what it is that you're looking to create. More than visual art, more than music, more than any of the, quote, arts. If you're looking to write a book, if you're looking to develop a system or a structure, you have an idea for something and you want to chase that down and make it a reality and execute it. That's what can be applied to this process that I want to share with you. So I want to ask you, what's one thing you want to create? I want you to write it down. Be specific. Don't just be like, hey, I'd really love to create, be more prolific in something. I'd really love to be able to rise to the top. Like, be specific. It's this thing. This is what it looks like for you in your context. Write that down. And the reason I'm asking you to write that down and be really specific is because it is so much easier to have a specific context to apply this for, and then you can actually overlay it onto other things once you have that one thing dialed in. Otherwise, you'll find yourself chasing a million different things and having no progress at all and thinking, this is not working, and you'll jettison the whole thing. I've been there, trust me. The first part of this process is start small. When I was suffering from depression, I had to start small. It's all I had was 15, 20 minutes a day. I couldn't spend an afternoon, a day, a weekend, because I just didn't have it in me. But it was actually a gift, because starting small is manageable. Starting small gives us a point at which we can enter in and get things moving. Because let's be honest, we have a bias towards big. We want everything big, right? I want a big budget. I want big blocks of time. I want expensive materials and things, and everything's got to be big. And we underestimate small. But for me, I started realizing that those 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, even though it was small, consistently spread out over time, it was doing something that wouldn't happen if I waited for the big. Because let's be honest, most of the time the big doesn't come. We're waiting for those large blocks of time. We're waiting for uninterrupted time, and that's really not what happens in our day. And so what ends up happening is we end up drifting. We go with the flow and we drift because big doesn't arrive. But if we actually learned to value small, we would steal those moments where we can. We would recognize the value in them. There were moments where I was like, okay, my 20 minutes today is coming during a lunch hour. I'm taking a portion of that and doing my creative act and exercise. There was other times when it was like before somebody gets up, as people are going to bed, whatever that looks like. I had to figure out in the rhythm of things, what does that look like for me? Where can I show up in small daily increments so that I can be making progress and not wait for the big? What's the smallest next step I can take? I want you to ask yourself, looking at that thing that you want to create, what's the next smallest step that you can take? We all want to get to the end. We all want the thing finished and wrapped, and we all want accolades, and we all want it to be the best thing ever. But back it up. Next step. What's the smallest next step you can do? And as you do that, keep asking yourself this question in the process. Because those strung together will lead you. It will progress. You will get things done. The second thing, schedule it. And I know you're like, that's the most uncreative thing I've ever heard. Schedule it. Are you out of your mind? The muse doesn't come at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. I have to be open. I want to be inspired. And I totally get you. If you're wired that way and you're like, free, flow, I'll figure it out. Last minute, cool. Like, totally hear you. But give yourself a container to work within. And in that container, go nuts. Be as free as you want. Because if you don't schedule it, what happens? It doesn't happen. And not just like scheduling it like, I'm going to write this on my calendar and then like it keeps getting bumped because there's other priorities and things. Like schedule it and protect the thing with a machete like you would if it were an important doctor's appointment or a very special gathering, maybe an anniversary, a birthday party, something meaningful, impactful that you would prioritize for. Part of this is also that I don't think we really believe completely in our ability to create and in the impact of what we can create. Because if we truly believed that it could be that amazing, we would prioritize more for it. It would come easier. And so this is a fight. And so part of the fight is I'm going to leverage something like this, like my calendar, and I'm going to schedule it. And then show up. And know when I'm going to show up. Like, minimize the amount of things that you have to do in order to show up. Like, don't enter decision fatigue before you even started creating anything. Set yourself up for success. Put it on your calendar. And after you're in the flow of things, after there's a habit that forms, momentum is taken over, if you want to switch things up, great. But at least in the beginning, the schedule is your friend. So ask yourself, where am I booking time in my calendar? Put your own name in there and say, time to create. Or call it whatever you want. If you think other people are going to see it and you're worried about what they think, call it something real crazy. Get real creative with the name of it, and they won't have any idea what that is, but you'll know. And you'll know when to show up.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.